wonderful, right?
If I'd only known the last time would be the last time, I would have put off all the things I had to do. I would have stayed a little longer, held on a little tighter. Now what I'd give for one more day with you. 'Cause there's a wound here in my heart, that something's missing, and they tell me that it's gonna heal with time. But I know you're in a place where all your wounds have been erased, knowing yours are healed or healing mine. The only scars in heaven, they won't belong to me and you. There won't be no such thing as broken, and all the old will be made new, and though that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is the only scars in heaven, or on the hands that hold you now. None of the road you walked was anything but easy. You picked up your share of scars along the way. Oh, but now you're standing in the sun. You fought your fight, your race is run. The pains is all a million miles away. The only scars in heaven, they won't belong to me and you. There'll be no such thing as broken, and all the old will be made new, and the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is the only scars in heaven, are on the hands that hold you now. There's not a day go by that I don't see you. You live in the better parts of me, till I'm standing with you in the sun. Fight this race I won, till I finally see what you can see. Oh, the only scars in heaven, they won't belong to me and you. There'll be no such thing as broken, and all the old will be made new, and the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is the only scars in heaven, are on the hands that hold you now.
And tender, will
24th chapter, Jesus specifically talks about his return. In all of Matthew, there are 5 different discourses that they call, and this discourse is called the Olivet Discourse. Can you guess why it's called the Olivet Discourse? Delivered on the Mount of Olives. How many of you know where the Mount of Olives is? It's east of Jerusalem. Our tour guide over here, Trey. And they say there are still olive trees 2,000 years ago there from the screen as Jesus was leaving the temple grounds his last time. His disciples pointed out to him various temple buildings, but he responded, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth. They will be completely demolished. No, not one stone will be left on top of another." I don't know if you've seen great churches. I've spent my entire pastorate looking at huge churches. The very first church ever built was over 300 years, 400 years after Jesus' death and resurrection and after the Pentecost. They didn't meet in churches. They met in houses and in public places where they could meet. The first church building wasn't built for a long, long time. But I've spent a lot of time looking at churches. In fact, we were here, I want to say it's the 80s, when we were at NASA. And I remember us going over to the new Second Baptist Church. You ever been in that place? You know, at NASA, our church was half the size of this. I mean, not NASA, that was our first church. NASA, well, it was about half the size of this. It wasn't very much bigger. We had built a new church, and it wasn't very big, and I always thought, you know, we really need more. And it reached a place where we had to buy another building because we didn't have enough room in the sanctuary, and that was only after a year. But we eventually heard about Second Baptist and Ed Young, and so we went over there and we looked at this new building. It was pretty new, just been built. Went inside. Biggest church building I've ever seen. Most beautiful church building. They had stained glass all over the place. I mean, the platform was bigger than our church right here. It's a building. It was just unbelievable. And have been to other churches and just, you know, in my own mind, dreams of building a great monstrosity to God. I don't have those dreams. I don't think I was right about those dreams. But the temple was built by Solomon to begin with. It was a great, great temple. It was because that was the place that God chose for him to be with his people. Of course, that was eventually torn down by Nebuchadnezzar, and then later during Cyrus, he sent people back to be able to build the new temple. And then later in years, it would be Herod who would begin to build onto this temple that was a shadow of what it was when Solomon built it. But even in those days, this is interesting. Let me just read to you a few things that I found. Jerusalem, they would say, would have anywhere from 100,000, 200,000 people who would come in and out through it. But on festival days, which would be like the Passover and the feasts, the different feasts, there would be almost 2 million people who would come into 1 million people who would come into the city. And so the temple had to be a place where everybody could go, and they had to be able to give their sacrifices. The plaza which was the fence, the wall around the temple. The plaza itself was the size of 6 football fields. I never think of it being so big. It was huge. Those were just the walls. And they say that the walls that surrounded the temple itself were about 5 yards thick. And they would go up to 15 to 20 stories tall. That's just the wall. I mean, if you look at the walls in Revelation, then Jesus talks about coming back and building a new Jerusalem. They're amazing how big they are. If you want to go through all that, but you know, the stones that were laid for the walls and for the temple were anywhere from 2 to 100 tons, blocks of stone. There's one that they say is the cornerstone one, was 100 tons. Now, in building that, particularly that wall around the temple, they built that stone upon a stone, and it was so tightly fit that you couldn't even put a piece of paper in between it. But they were able then, and I think it was either 3 or no, I guess it was 1 inch, 3 centimeters. For each stone from the bottom to the one on top, the one on top, the one on top, they indented that stonework at least 1 inch so that it would be able to handle the width of or the length of what those stones were, 16, 15 stories, whatever it was. The craftsmanship has the stonework. It's just unbelievable that temple was built, and then the temple itself was just a gigantic thing. There's just a whole lot of things we could talk about. I don't want to take the time to get into all of that, but the stone was white. The entrance to all the gates was bronze. There was gold in the temple itself. They would say that in the morning hours and late evening hours, the sun reflecting on the gold, it was very even difficult. It would blind you to look at the temple. I mean, just how beautiful it was. And so isn't it interesting that as the disciples would leave Jerusalem, that they would point these things out to Jesus. This is the Messiah. This is the one who is going now to set his kingdom up. Jesus had told his disciples that he was going to be going away. And there were many parables that he spoke concerning the master who would go away and then he would return. When Jesus is talking, he wants them to understand that this temple is nothing. It will be as nothing. It has already been desecrated by the religious leaders. They're just going through the motions of the sacrifices. They're just going through the motions of the festivals. They're just going through the motions of religion. And so Jesus says, in the rest of 24, at verse 2, Jesus said, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth. They will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." The temple wasn't even finished yet with Herod's upgrades. In fact, they wouldn't be finished until just a few years before 70 A.D. And in 70 A.D., the Romans would come and they would completely eviscerate Jerusalem and the temple. Well, the temple would be non-existent with the exception of the stones that were broken. And to this day, the only thing we have of that temple is the western wall, the holiest thing to the Jews. And many Christians believe that since that's where the temple was, the Western Wall, that's where the temple was, that someday a new temple will be built. And then Jesus will come. But Jesus goes on from talking about this later. Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will all this happen?" Now understand that Matthew and Mark and Luke all give us a description of the Olivet Discourse. But it's Mark who tells us who was there. Mark tells us that it was Peter, James, John, and Andrew who went to Jesus and said to him in private, "Tell us, when will this all happen?" Jesus told them, "Don't let anyone mislead you. For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah. They will deceive many." We've had plenty of people who have said that they're the Messiah. We had a guy up here in Waco several years ago, remember? Yeah, Koresh. We had a guy that went to, was it New Guinea? And was it Jones? Yeah, the Jones, whatever it was, the suicide. We've had people along the way. In fact, even before Jesus came, there were those who claimed to be the Messiah. It would be the Sadducees and the Pharisees who would talk about that. And one in particular would say, well, if you've known about the others and they died, and when their leaders died, the rest of them left. Let's see what happens with Jesus, because if you do something to him and he dies, you're dealing with God's plan, and you won't be able to win. And if he dies and he isn't the Messiah, they'll all run away too, like they have in the past. There will always be people who will consider themselves a Messiah. When you get into the book of Revelation, then there are plenty of people then that will be seen as potential Messiahs, but there'll be one who will come who is called the Antichrist. And he will set himself up as being not just the Antichrist, but he will consider himself to be God. So Jesus tells us, don't be misled. There is only one Jesus. Now, we Christians are going to have to reach the place some point in our lives when we lift up the name of Jesus more than anything else. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do away with the things that we believe. I think we should continue to believe in our doctrines and what churches believe. But as our theme for the year is, this is all about Jesus. This is all about him. He is coming back. As we read last week, Jesus said, "I am coming soon." And we'll talk a little bit about what that soon means, because 2,000 years, it doesn't seem like soon is here. But we'll get into that. We won't go down that rabbit hole today. But just understand that there will be people who will come and say, "Hey, follow me, and I'll meet your need." There will be spirits of Antichrist. There'll be ideologies that say that they're the answer. Our own government will tell you that they have all the answers for us. There is only one Jesus the Christ. We follow him. And how do we know what we should do? Well, we get in his word, we read his word, we stay in his word, we build our lives on his word. Does that mean you and I will know everything in our lifetime? Probably not. Because we're always going to learn something, even in the Word of God. It's amazing how many things I see going back and reading it for the 8th, 9th, 10th time. But there's only one way to know Jesus and know his will and know his plan, even when it comes to him coming back again. We won't know everything there is to know about that. But if we are not misled by who we follow, if we follow Jesus and Jesus alone, it won't make any difference what anybody else says. Our lives are built on Jesus Christ. It's all about Him. Number 2, the second one is there'll be wars and threats of war will come. There'll be, Jesus said, you'll hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Isn't that interesting? I hear a lot of people come up to me and say, man, we're living in the last days. Look at all the wars. And Jesus says there'll be wars and there'll be threats of wars, but what does He say? Don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow. I read something somewhere. There have been like over 500 wars that have come since the time of Jesus to today. Now, that might not be the right number, but there have been a lot of wars. The reason there's going to be wars is because people don't know Jesus. And we have got to reach the place in our own lives, in our own country, in our own families, that we are not going to get panicked over everything around the world that happens. You know, we're looking for a conspiracy behind every rock. We're looking for something we want to blame something on somebody or something. We want to blame all the problems with our present president. We want to blame all of our problems on the past president. We wanted to blame all the problems to our first president. You know what? It doesn't matter who the president of the United States is if the church is doing its job. If you and I are doing its job, if we're winning people to Jesus, at least in our country, if we're winning people and we're influencing our world, then I kind of think that those people that we elect will take care of themselves, but also understand the enemy is out here and he's fighting as hard as he can to take our cities and to take our families and to take our countries. And he will have his way as long as people want to do what they want to do. So in the midst of all the things that we don't like happening, I think it's important for you and for me to realize that these threats are going to be here, and we're the only ones that have the light and the life to spread to a world that's fearful of what the next war and the next threat is going to be. I just want you to know that I think Jesus is trying to tell us, as He will mention next week, that there is no set time. These things will all take place. The intensity will grow. You have to get into different books like Daniel and get into books like Zechariah and Ezekiel and get into books like Revelation and the Thessalonians and, to get into John. There's just so many things where the end of the world is spoken of. It's just a good thing to know that at the beginning Jesus was saying, these things are going to happen. Do not be misled. Keep Jesus as Lord of your life. Keep Jesus at the center of your heart. His will be done, not my will be done. And in doing that, we may see these things happen, but we can tell our family and our friends and our neighbors, these are only birth pangs. You can overcome these because Jesus has overcome them, and He wants us to continue to live for Him, walk in His steps as He walks with us daily. And this second coming will be a blessing to look forward to, more than something to fear, which so many people do. There's nothing to fear in death.